Sangye Cherang Soke Chognam La Jangcho Badu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Chenyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Dropa Shog Sangye Cherang Soke Chognam La Jangcho Badu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Chenyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Dropa Shog Sangye Cherang Soke Chognam La Jangcho Badu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Chenyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Dropa Shog. All right. Okay. So, okay. So often, I feel around the world, I listen to people talk and you read books about Buddhism and you listen to talk to Buddhists. There's often not that much talk about this business of karma, and when we do talk about it, among Buddhists, but not to mention non-Buddhists, it's talked about in a really cliched, colloquial way, And many people don't even talk about it. Many Buddhist groups don't even discuss the concept of karma. So it's kind of interesting because if we look at Buddhism from the big picture point of view, which is what I really like and what I really appreciate from the Tibetan monastic university system, which is the source of anything that I'm saying here, coming from my teachers in that tradition, Buddhism is a worldview, It's an actually highly elaborate, detailed description of the universe. This is what it is. And you could say that the two fundamentals without which you don't understand Buddhism, without which Buddhism would just sound like a weird bunch of wacko ideas. The two crucial things, and they're utterly linked, is understanding the Buddha's view of the mind and understanding the Buddha's view of the law of cause and effect, which he calls the law of karma. These are absolutely central, fundamental, crucial to understanding and therefore to practicing Buddhism. So, of course, the biggest problem we have, like we were discussing this last night, that, we're so used to thinking of spiritual teachings as a belief system. It's the deepest default assumption we have. The questions we had last night, it's one of the commonest things. There's an assumption that you can't prove it because it's talking about something that's called a past life or a future life. That's so deep in our bones from our materialist point of view that something has to be seen, to be proved. Whether it's a microscope or the naked eye or whatever, So as soon as we hear that Buddha talks about reincarnation, so we know perfectly well a brain doesn't reincarnate, so then we assume it's a religion, we assume it's a belief system, which means also, as we talked again last night, we assume it's a bunch of information coming from on high, created by somebody. This is what we talked yesterday, if you were here. We talked about the basis of morality, which is the basis of taking vows, like we talked last night, which is the basis of which is this view of karma. We talked about it yesterday. To understand where Buddha's coming from, therefore to understand why his view of ethics or morality, that is his view of karma. That's what he means, and to understand where that information comes from. These things we never think about, but it's unbelievably important in order to get our head around just exactly who this bloke called Buddha is and where this information called Buddhism comes from. This is so important, we don't tend to speak it out. So like I say, I was brought up a Catholic, and I believed in God, quote unquote. That's what we say, isn't it? You believe in God. And that means you have faith in God, and very much a very devoted Christian would have blind faith. And I am not criticizing here. Please believe me. I'm not criticizing. You meet anybody who's got total faith in God, they're a really, I don't mean a fundamentalist who's neurotic and wants to drop bombs on you. I mean a sincere person who's living according to the laws of love and compassion and kindness and morality, who has utter faith in a creator. They're an amazing human being and they're peaceful. I remember reading, one of those many crashes last year, air crashes, and one of certainly they talked about it a lot in Australia because they fly a lot there. There's a company called Air Asia, very cheap airline. I think they fly this part of the continent, this part of the world. I'm not sure. So they're based in Malaysia, and so there was one of their planes crashed and everybody died, and they were all Malaysians, and Malaysians they were the Muslims. So the usual photos of heartbroken people, their children, their beloveds, their husbands, their mothers, their fathers dead. And there was one married couple who were asked, how do you feel about your dead daughter? They were peaceful. They said, she belongs to God. He has taken her back. We are content. I think that's sublime. What happened?
You're too demonstrative, I think.
It's definitely true. So what I'm getting at is look at that result. They were peaceful, and their view was that she belonged to the Creator. They have total faith in God, so they were peaceful. Well, in the end, almost you could argue, who cares what you believe? If it makes you happy, good on you. Believe it. And I'm not being sarcastic here. If it ends up making you peaceful and happy, hey, baby, go for it, I don't care. In one sense, I don't care, really, in a way, if it's going to make you happy. Look at these people. Peaceful. Amazing. So that's the classic, I'd say, the perfect way to apply the teachings of a Creator. Now, if every Christian and Muslim did that, the world would be a blissful place, guaranteed. Unbelievable. But everybody says they believe in God and then they complain. I mean, it's kind of both ways. God's got his plan, God has a plan, and it's not my job to know his plan. That is the worst arrogance. God is a superior being who created the universe, and he is the boss. So this is a perfect view if that's the view you have. Okay, it happens to be Buddha disagrees with that view. He's not being argumentative. He actually says the philosophical view that underpins that concept, he would say that's a construct of humans. He would say that. And he's allowed to think that, isn't he? And that's the Buddha's view. So the Buddha's view is this. He doesn't assert a creator. He says it's an unnecessary embellishment. We don't need creating. Because his view would assert we have a consciousness. He doesn't use the word soul. Consciousness or mind. Now, we use that word in the West and we think brain. If you're a Christian, you think soul. There's these two separate things, isn't it? For the Buddha, he talks about mind or consciousness, and he says it's not physical. But he doesn't call it a soul. So your mind is your concepts, intellect, thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious. All this is your consciousness, your mind. For the Buddha, that's not physical. Second point, it is not given to you by anybody else. For the Buddha, it's the weirdest idea that you can be made by a parent or made by a creator. For him, that's the wackiest thing. It's just not logical, not on. It doesn't sound, in the beginning, hearing it just sounds weird, but if indeed one is taking Buddhism as one's hypothesis, which is the view, you'd study that and hear what he's saying, He would suggest that your consciousness is not physical, it doesn't come from mummy, daddy, it is not the handiwork of your parents, it is not your brain, and it's not the handiwork of a superior being. There's no part of you that comes from a superior being, Buddha would say. So now we think, well, who's this bloke called Buddha? Where does he get his information from? What superior being tells him about it? That's how we think. Nobody. Where did he get it from? He's a scientist, and please don't think I'm being sarcastic or funny, We know that a person who's labelled a scientist has used their own noggin to observe things and has come to certain conclusions and can show their logic. Is that what we call a scientist? Broadly speaking, is that not true? Is that not the scientific approach? Okay? Well, that is Buddha's approach. So what you've got to do is change your view. Don't assume that means that it's something you can see with a microscope. No, the same approach is applied. And the fact is, if it can't be finally what he says is what he has seen to be true from his own direct experience in his mind, which he, by the way, says is not physical, and we'll go into this more. And he says if you follow his methodology, following the steps that he showed you, just like Einstein, and if Einstein is correct, logically you will come to the same conclusion, and that means you will verify Einstein's finding. Is this not normal kind of? Your teacher will tell you that 1 + 1 is 2. It's the same principle. You don't just believe her. She forces you to believe that 1 + 1 is 2. What's the reasoning? That's not your business. Just believe what I tell you. No. She says, go home, Robina, and check it out and prove it for yourself. That's called doing your homework. And if you go back and you prove to her that she's wrong, if she's a proper scientist, she will accept your point. This is the approach. That's Buddha's approach. It's a big surprise to us. It's a shocking surprise to us, actually, because we think of it as a belief system, like everything else, you know. And so we're also la-di-da and mystical about Buddhism, which I can't stand. That's why I get so rude. And we talk in hushed tones, we say mystical things. Everything you watch on YouTube that's called Buddhism, you can guarantee there's a slow flute music behind. I can't tell you. I just can't stand it. Buddha says check up. That's what he means. They use this nice analogy way back 2,500 years ago. You treat his teachings like you would a piece of gold. Obviously, you didn't have gold. Who has gold, you know? Obviously, they use gold then. You check it. You don't just believe it's gold. You check and prove it's gold. That's his point. But because it's sort of this nice, arcane Indian language, we mystify it again, you know? We don't hear it properly. It's shocking to hear it in this down-to-earth way. Basically, Buddha is a regular guy with delusions and neuroses, just like he probably cheated on his wife, lied and stole and did the rest. You know, he was a regular person with delusions. And then from his own hard work, in fact, coming from these amazing Hindus, I mean, I read that recently in His Holiness's book, and I love that, you know. It was these Hindus more than 3,000 years ago. They're the beginning. Buddhism came out of that. These amazing, brilliant, genius Indian thinkers. They're the ones who came up with this whole tradition, this technique called concentration meditation. They're the ones who cultivated it. And what it is a skill of your own mind. It's a cognitive skill. And the accomplishment of this single point of concentration, if you have accomplished it, you would look like you were dead. Because what you've done using this marvelous technique that these blokes did, these amazing Indians, you've accessed a subtler level of your mind. And even out of that, as a result of their being in the subtle level of their mind, not spacing out hippy-trippy, but super focused, super clear, they've come up with, as a result of observing their own cognitive process, not the brain, the actual cognitive process, the process of your own mind itself, your own consciousness, your own cognition, this highly sophisticated process that they've identified and presented. And this is the basis of all, even the texts that are studied in the monasteries up until today. The understanding of the way the mind, the epistemological model of the mind in Buddhism, as well as the psychological model. This comes from these Indians. Buddha came out of this marvelous tradition of incredible rigor, you know, discipline, clarity. It's astonishing, actually. I think Western scientists will be blissed out to study it if they dared to have the courage to posit the possibility that the brain isn't the mind. So Buddha came out of this. And he went through all this marvelous, he left home, you know, and then which was a very current, strong tradition then of these amazing people who gave up their home life and went off discovering the truth. Looking into the nature of self. That's their technique, that's their trip. Atma, the Hindus call it. They were looking into what is a person. There's an amazing, highly sophisticated psychological process they went through. But we don't think that. Most Indians don't even know that. And most Westerners just think of an Indian with a red dot and these weird naked ladies and statues, you know. It's the best we can think of as Indian. These astonishing beings, these amazing thinkers. It's hidden to the West, you know. Buddha came out of this. And he carried on in his own direction. He diverged from the Hindus in relation specifically to the findings in his own mind about what the self actually is. And this is in the mind itself to the subtlest degree of this cognitive process known as consciousness. The level, you know, because we posit the mind as the brain, then we only posit the grossest of conceptuality, don't we? You know? But this is the tip of the grossest tip of the iceberg of the mind as far as this Buddhist model is concerned, coming from this Indian tradition, you know. And you can't see it with a microscope. The only way to investigate your mind is to train the mind, first of all, in this single point of concentration technique, so that then you can begin to unravel and unpack and deconstruct and then reconstruct into the mind of an enlightened being, your own mind itself. It is not cosmic, it is not mystical. It is a highly sophisticated, intensely demanding job of enormous effort and rigor and clarity and intelligence. And with that mind, Buddha would say, you can see reality, see truth. Those words are mystical to us. He's got a very specific way about meaning that. So also Buddha's observation from his own direct experience in his own mind is that our consciousness, and this is insane to us as we say the words, even as I say them, it's kind of like ridiculous, that your consciousness is the product of itself. You know, we're so used to this dualistic, and that's a really good word in Buddhist philosophy, the dualistic model that says you're either the handiwork of a superior being or you're the handiwork of mummy and daddy. They're the two options available to us in this universe. That's it. We assume we're the handiwork of someone else. This is the wackiest idea for the Buddha. He says, you're the handiwork of yourself, babe. And that's the simplest way of talking about what karma means. You know, the way people talk about karma, when in the newspapers and people's view of it, it's kind of embarrassing to read it. And even most Buddhists use it in the most grossly wrong, kind of cliched way, you know. This, for the Buddha, it's a natural law. No one made it up. This is what science means. You know, mathematics, some clever Arab way back, you know, kind of came up with this marvellous 0 to 9 system instead of that stupid looking Roman one with figures, you know, with I's and V's. What a genius. Look at the, you can say he created that, but this is the crucial point about what creation means. We think God is a being who creates something out of nothing, like poof, like a magic wand, you know. But a scientist is a person who actually takes what's already there and articulates it. So you could say that Arab fellow created mathematics, but he took what's already existing. Like a botanist is a person who takes already the natural laws of the universe, but they put, you know, she or he, whoever, put words onto it, articulate it. But it's botany is a natural law. We know that. Gravity is a natural law, and these clever scientists have taken this and have observed it with their clever minds and articulated it. That's what we mean by science. That's Buddha's view. That's how he talks. So he says karma, shorthand, karma, the law of karma, it's a natural law. Hear the words. He's not a creator. He didn't make it up. It's his direct observation with his own mind of how the universe exists and what karma is. It's a law that plays out in minds, in lives. And karma, finally, is done by minds. You can't separate karma from minds. So you've got to know what Buddha means by the mind in order to understand what he means by karma. So he's basically saying the universe is full of trillions of sentient beings, and the term in Tibetan is a lovely term, sem-chen, mind possessor. The universe is full of trillions of mind possessors. Humans are like 1/1,000,000% of all of them. And that incorporates a vast spectrum of mind possessors, way more than the materialist models would assert. Humans is one example of mind possessors. Animals are another. All the creatures and the animals, they're all mind possessors. There are beings that the Buddha would assert that can be cognized at a subtler level of mind, not with the gross mind, not with the gross conceptual mind, the only one that we posit as existing in our culture. There are trillions of sentient beings who also exist, either extremely suffering or blissful beings who haven't got gross bodies, you know? Trillions of them. This is Buddha's observation. And he says every one of these minds, every millisecond of every one of these minds, necessarily whatever the mind is doing, and it's highly complex, which is why we have to learn to know our minds so that we can be in charge of this process. Every millisecond is doing an action. The term karma means action, but starts with mental action, intention. Not, oh, I have a good intention, but literally volition or will I will. And it's happening like thousands a second, you know. Highly complex, much of it instinctive, from countless eons of practice, he says. So every millisecond of what our mind is doing, this is the analogy, they use the analogy of seeds and fruits, is sowing seeds that kind of, or programming, I like this one, we'd like this one, programming our mind. Every millisecond what we think and therefore do and say on the basis of what we think, because the body and the speech are just, let's face it, just the servants of our mind, aren't they? I will think I will walk out that door. Well, mind is, it's not enough to have the thought, I've got to have legs to carry me out, don't I? And you all can deduce, if I start walking out that door, you can deduce there was a thought, an intention, I will walk out the door. And if there isn't the intention, I will walk out the door, and my legs start to carry me, you can think I've got a serious problem. As Lama Zopa says, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought. Don't hear it as cosmic. The thought, intention. It's the actual meaning of the word karma, the tastiest, most direct meaning of the word. But it's so quick, so fast, these so-called intentions. It sounds very rational to us to say to have an intention. Most are irrational and most are instinctive because we practice them to perfection. So karma is this law, and so another way of calling it is the law of cause and effect, which means every millisecond of what your mind does sows a seed that will ripen in the future in various ways as a result of that seed, of that intention, of that thought, of that action. So he then, a simple way of presenting these actions is in three categories. There are negative actions, there are positive actions, and there are neutral actions. And they come from negative states of mind, positive states of mind, and neutral states of mind. So forget the neutral for the moment. And these are not moralistic terms, these are technical terms. So every millisecond of what our mind is doing, we need to be able to identify and then slowly become in charge of this process. Right now we're just driven by the power of our past habits. And another key word for what karma is just a bunch of habits. Because the way they use this, the concept of karma, the concept of seeds and fruits, okay? So karma ripens. Every millisecond what we think and do and say ripens in the future necessarily in four ways. The first way, the main way, that a seed we plant in the mind, and all the actual process of it, the understanding of it, the identifying of it, the way it works is intensely complex. Like anything, you know. You can start with the simplest principles of biology, or of botany, can't you? You need a seed, a bit of earth, a bit of sun, a bit of water, and a bit of time, you'll get a fruit, you know. But to be a brilliant botanist, you need to know more than that. You've got to unpack and unravel that process, and so you can be in charge of that process. It's exactly the same here. So every millisecond, what our mind is doing, it's sowing seeds. And each of them will bring fruits. And there are four kinds of fruits. One is the main one, which is the type of rebirth we get. So already, we're taking the view, Buddha's view, which will be our hypothesis in this room, from Buddha's observation. You can't possibly prove it first, you have to take it as your hypothesis. That consciousness is this non-physical energy, and think of it as a river of mental moments. Even the term they use in Buddhist psychology is the term mental continuum. So, you know, this second of mind is all that exists. It's obvious. The moment of mind 3 seconds before does not exist. It's finished, it's over, it's dead, it's gone, isn't it? So it's only this moment of mind that actually exists. But we can deduce logically, and it's the same with physical matter. This cup of this moment is all that exists. It's very clear. But if we start to look for the evolution of the cup, where did the cup begin? What's the cause of the cup? This is the meaning of cause and effect. Where does the cup come from? We'd track it back in a very logical way, wouldn't we? Well, we could gradually, you know, if you had a movie that went backwards, you'd go back to when it was clay, and then the paint was over here, and the clay was there, and then a person who put it together in the factory, and that clay came from there, well, the paint came from there, and then this came from that, and you keep tracking it back. And of course, instinctively, we keep wanting, especially when it comes to our mind, we want the first big cause, want a big dramatic first moment. We're very desperately believing there's always got to be a first moment. Buddha says it's ridiculous. And I'll explain. So you keep tracking back. You know you'll go back in an unbroken chain of physical moments of this stuff, and you'll get back to what you would call the first moment of this universe. And of course you have to then go, what was before that? Where did that energy come from? Because you won't have a gap where there was nothing and it suddenly popped up again. No, there's an unbroken continuity of energy, in this case physical energy. The Buddhist view would happen to talk about the physical world, just like our mob did back in the Middle Ages, as being constructed of the 4 elements. That's the model they still use in Buddhism. The physical matter is the 4 elements. So you keep tracking this back, the Buddhist view, you'd get back to the subtlest level of the subtlest of those 4 elements, the wind energy, which is the fundamental building blocks of the 4 elements. And it's dealt with in great depth in all the literature. But then you will go, well, where did that one come from? And as His Holiness says, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. Because we all want a first moment. Buddha thinks it's a nutty idea. Because if you posit cause and effect, whether it's of a cup or a person or a mind or a moment of anger or a moment of suffering or a moment of happiness, you name it, you cannot find a first cause. We desperately want there to be. One of the commonest questions we have is, where did it begin? Where did karma begin? Where did suffering begin? Where did I begin? Where did the universe begin? We want a first Big Bang. We want a first moment. Meaning, we want a moment that didn't have a cause. Because if you could have a first moment, by definition, it didn't have a cause, did it? Which is exactly what we think of creation. God makes it all out of nothing. They say that. Buddha says it's not on. He disagrees with that finding. He says it's rational and logical. So he says if you do this process, you're not going to find a first moment of this consciousness of yours. The idea that you can track it back, and you could if you had perfect memory, back to your mummy's womb, you'd end up back there. And then you think when you get to some point, you know that if you get back, well, in the Buddhist view, you get back to the first moment of conception, which is when the egg and the sperm came together. So that's when we think, I began, isn't it? Robina began. And I tracked myself back to mummy and daddy and grandpa, grandma, and who knows where, back to the old, monkey fellows. Isn't it? That's our view. I'm not being sarcastic. I always say that, then I'm about to be sarcastic. I'm not being. I'm just talking Buddha's view. He says, sure, egg came from mummy's body, sperm came from daddy's body, no probs. But your consciousness, honey, it came from previous moments of itself. And you can't think that if it's the brain, it doesn't work. So you've got to posit the possibility that your consciousness is not physical. That's all. It's not complicated. It's just that we don't like it. Because it doesn't fit with the model we've got in our head already. It squeezes it out, It's complicated. So just think of your mind as a continuity of mental moments. So then, this is where really, like we've been talking about, when as Lama Yeshe puts it, to be your own therapist and know your own mind well, and you want to know why you're angry, well, the materialist model naturally says there must be something back in the past that happened to you, that caused you to get angry, and then caused you to have lousy relationships, So we keep looking for this needle in a haystack. What happened back then that caused Robina to get angry? That's our view. We feel this so strongly, don't we? Buddha says, don't make it complicated. Why am I angry? Well, Robina, darling, he says, you must have been angry before. You've got a tendency in your mind to be angry. Oh my gosh, why was I angry before? Well, honey, it was because you were angry before. But my goodness, why was I angry before? Well, I'm sorry, Robina, you must have been angry before. And you will never find the first one. You can't. It's not possible. Intellectually, it's not possible. You can't find a first moment. Aha, there it is. Anger began then. What caused it? It has to have been the previous tendency to be angry in that mind itself. It's not complicated intellectually. You just got to think it and then posit it, and because this is part of the process of taking Buddha's views as your hypothesis, so you can think it through. You got to think it through, not just believe in it. So as His Holiness says, Buddhism's like self-creation. So the first way our karma from the past, are intentional actions which leave imprints in this mind, that program this mind continuously. The first way, and again it's a highly elaborate process of how it actually occurs, if we take this life that we've got now, human life, then we can deduce logically, according to this model of the Buddhas, that not more than a few weeks before our consciousness ran like a magnet, in my case, I deduced it's about May 1944 because I popped out 7 months later. I must have been impatient. Nothing's new, haven't changed. So about May 1944 I've deduced. My mummy and daddy hopped into bed. Well, wherever they hopped. I didn't ask them. And my consciousness zapped into a very subtle level, I'll explain, of this consciousness zapped into their egg and sperm. That's the beginning of that package called Robina. But the body came from mummy and daddy. The consciousness came from previous moments of that continuity of mental consciousness, which a few weeks before was in another body, Buddha would say. It's all dealt with in great depth in the literature, And especially in the Vajrayana tradition, which is the tradition that I've studied in. It's explained in great depth, and this process of death in particular is fascinating. And as I've mentioned, I just finished editing, and it's this book of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's, How to Help People at the Time of Death. And the death process, as well as the 12 links of dependent arising, Lord Buddha's teachings, are dealt with in there in relation to the death process in particular. And it's most fascinating. And it's available as an ebook. You can download it from fpmt.org/death. It's the third book down. You'll get it there. It's free. Wisdom's publishing it next year if you want to buy it, but you can get it for free now. Anyway, it's a really marvellous book. All the details of what to do the weeks and months before death, how to help your loved ones, how to educate yourself in this system, but to understand in particular the death process and then understand the process of how we take rebirth. Well, as Lama, as Rinpoche says, not in this book particularly this way, but in order for our consciousness to go to our mummy's human womb, which we can deduce it did, because here we are embodied in a human body, we can't believe, the Buddhist view would be, how much virtuous or positive karmic imprints, seeds planted in our mind from virtuous intentions, motivated by virtuous motivations and carried out with our body and speech. Masses of practice of virtue, intentional virtue, intentional morality, such that at the time of our past death, a very strong virtuous karmic seed would have been triggered, and it's highly complex, the actual process, and it's described in this book, would have been triggered before you even stop breathing in the past life, which is why, in this book again, Rinpoche is stressing so strongly, if you're going to help anybody throughout their life, you help them at the time of their death. That's when they need you most. To die peacefully and virtuously is the most amazing gift you can give anybody. Your dog, the fish, the ant, your grandma, you name it. Because that's when the next life is determined. This is what the Buddhist view would say. And it's again a natural law. Keep remembering this is a natural law. Keep remembering this is the observation of the Buddha and all the great yogis since that time who have followed this process and who have observed what the Buddha said. This is, you have to deduce this, It's from observation. So, a very powerful, virtuous karmic seed, and based on what we talked last night, a very strong, virtuous karmic seed, probably practiced in the context of keeping vows of morality in a spiritual path, would have been triggered at the time before we even stopped breathing. Simultaneously, millions of other karmic seeds, because you see, the interesting point in Buddhism, every millisecond of whatever we see, hear, say, smell, touch, think about, it's really fascinating, actually doesn't disappear. It all gets stored in our mind. We can't access most of it. I mean, we can't, even after 1 hour of being up in the morning, we don't remember 99% of that day, do we? Because our gross conceptual mind doesn't have the capability. But there's not a millisecond of what we see and hear, especially these senses are very powerful, or what we think about that doesn't get stored in our mind. And this is where Buddha would eventually, as we can learn to develop single point of concentration, get more advanced spiritually, we can access that stuff. That's what clairvoyance means. It's actually there, available to anybody who does the work, It's just interesting. That's one I saw on YouTube recently. This young woman who's mother left her when she was young, and she took care of the kids, and she's a very sweet girl, you can tell, and she was very depressed, you know, very unhappy. Then she got married when she was young and had babies, and then she got very depressed and she decided to kill herself. So she tried to kill herself, and she had this amazing experience. But the crucial piece, which I thought was fascinating, was, and this is common, we read about these experiences, and this fits with the Buddhist view exactly, that nothing goes astray, everything is implanted in your mind. As one Lama said, it's like every millisecond of your day you're taking photos and you're storing them in your mind. So she had this vividest of vivid experience. Once she didn't die. She had this like out-of-body experience. But she had this vividest of vivid experience of every major event in her life, starting from the time she was born. Crystal clear. Now the Buddhist view is that's all been planted in her mind. But she was able to access it. Why? Using the Buddhist model. Because when she tried to kill herself, the gross consciousness ceased. But her subtle consciousness, which is what is capable of seeing this, which is what is the part of us that dreams. People have clairvoyant experiences, out-of-body experiences. This is what the Buddhism would call your subtle consciousness, which we don't even posit as existing in our materialist world, you know. She had the vividest experience of every one, but the fascinating part, incidentally, which I thought was amazing, was every one of those experiences she recalled vividly, up to the second she tried to kill herself. Every one of the experiences was from the point of view of the other person. Like phenomenal empathy. I thought that was really fascinating. But the point I'm making here is there's nothing that goes into our mind that we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, think about, ever, Buddha says, that has gone astray. It's all there to be accessed. So the time I passed death, not more than a few weeks before we pass, few hours before we pass, soon before we stop breathing, already programmed. Me, in my case, programmed to zap into my mummy Billy Bliss. She married Teddy Corton. They wanted a boy, you see. Her name was Agnes, but they called her Billy. So her name was Agnes Bliss. And I was called after my auntie, Robina Bliss, who then married Stasys Arkušauskas and became Robina Arkušauskas, Lithuanian. We thought Bliss was a stupid name when we were children. Anyway, there's my mummy and daddy. Robina, a few weeks before that, it could have been a few hours before, you don't know how long you take to get to the womb. If they're ready, no wasting time, you know. First of all, the karmic seed that was triggered that caused me to get a human body. Secondly, all the karmic seeds simultaneously. It's like I like to say, we're all lugging around all these bank vaults of trillions of seeds from everything we've ever thought and said and done. This is the way of talking, you know. Nothing goes astray. So the first seed was triggered that would cause me to get the human body. The second lot of karmic seeds that were triggered would be all the ones that are called experiences similar to the cause, which is essentially, starting with my parents, the people and beings you meet in your life and basically how they see you and treat you. And we all know, if you look into your life, you can divide your life in terms of other beings into happy experiences or suffering experiences, can't you? The people who are kind to you and the ones who are mean to you. Look at it, it's pretty basic. Every one of those experiences at the hands of those beings, whether it's the cockroaches shitting in your spoon drawer, the rats eating your house, or your beloved husband, or the wretched rapist, that's personal karma, baby. Karma for Buddha is a natural law, therefore it cannot be random. This is so shocking to us. Because we assume it is, that's why it's shocking. Because we assume nobody knows, there's no cause, it's just good luck, bad luck, cross your fingers and hope for the best. We think we're scientific. Forgive me. The third, and that starts with the parents I got. Already programmed, even before I stopped breathing in the past life, who knows wherever I was, you know, it could have been a kangaroo. Already this is triggered. You know, Teddy and Billy weren't even thinking about little old Bobsy. That's me, you know, this is weeks before. Already programmed. The simultaneously all the seeds that will become the experiences at their hands, my siblings, the sisters, the nuns at school, the people in the Melbourne suburbs where I was in the 40s and 50s and 60s in Australia, the meanies, the niceys, because we make intense... Look at how social we are. We're social beings, aren't we? Well, then guess what? We create karma to each other and we're going to get it later. Good and bad. There's no sentient being you meet who's you've not done that to before. It's just, Buddha says this is logical. It's a natural law. He did not make it up. He didn't create it. Certainly didn't create it. Oh my goodness. The third way, way karma ripens is simultaneously triggered at the time of death, is what's called actions similar to the cause, which refers to your tendencies, your personality traits, your characteristics, whether you're a psychopath, whether you're full of love or compassion or being good at football or good at piano or good at anger or good at jealousy, you name it, your tendencies, your personality characteristics, your intelligence, your stupidity, whatever it is in your mind. Nothing to do with your mummy and daddy and nothing to do with the creator. They're a bunch of your habits. They're all triggered. All this is simultaneous before you even stop breathing in the past life. And the fourth way your karma ripens, it's called environmental karma. Well, the way I like to put that, it's just my way of saying it, okay? The one called experience is similar to the cause, is like all the people around you, the ones who impact upon your life very strongly. Whether it's the person who rapes you or the person who gives you $100 million. Whether it's your mummy, your daddy, your siblings, the people who treat you, who love you, your boss, all the people who impact upon our lives in a very direct way. That's experiences similar to the cause, meaning, guess what? If you mean to me, I must have been mean to you. It's not cosmic. Buddha says it's a natural law. And karma's personal. We create intense history with each other. So we're going to keep bumping into each other. So you better sort it out in this life. But whereas environmental karma is sort of the way I like to put it. Let's just say, okay, use one example. Use one example of say, the conscious, intentional karmic seed imprint, the karmic seed of non-killing, and conscious, intentional non-killing, which is meaning, seeing a sentient being and avoiding killing them, or living in the vow of non-killing. The first way that would ripen would be as a human birth. Morality, the strong morality of restraint, practice in the context of a spiritual path, no doubt, one of those karmic seeds would cause a human body. The second way it would ripen in this life would be as an experience, which would be you wouldn't die young or get killed. Well, so far, each of us in this room has that one. We're not dead yet, and no one's killed us yet. But look at the world. The number of people who die young. Fetuses even die before they're born. They got a human birth, they won the lottery, their mind went to a human mummy's womb, but they died even before they got born. That's the result of having killed in the past. So they get the experience similar to the cause of having killed in the past. So the result is you get killed. In our case, we are experiencing every second we're alive the result of not having killed, of consciously, intentionally not killing. It's not just some accident, which is how we think about it. God's got a plan and he knows why I'm still alive, and scientists don't know yet. Or it's just good luck. No, Buddha says, it's logical. It's the fruit of our petrol tank of morality of non-killing hasn't run out yet. In particular, the track called experiences similar to the cause. So we're still breathing, and we're still alive, and no one has killed us yet. The fourth way non-killing is ripening for us is environmental karma of non-killing. Food is tasty, water's delicious, the air's relatively not polluted, the food nourishes us, we've got relatively good health. The karmic result of killing would be, you'd have an allergy to peanuts. The water's polluted, you get sick easily, you've got bad ill health. So environmental karma can also be personal, or even the result of killing karma environmentally could be you live in a place where people are dying all the time and a lot of ill health. Environmental karma for you, So the very environment you live in, the way things appear to you, how they impact upon you, all your experiences at the hands of sentient beings, all your own tendencies and your own humanity. Creator of this, you, okay? You're the boss. You did it, Buddha says. All the good and all the bad. But our trouble is, because we're all addicted to negativity, this is the terrible irony of ego. We are addicted to negativity. The only way we ever hear karma is in a negative way. In all these years, I've been a Buddhist and talking about this stuff, and I have to say this, I've never, and I say it all the time, ever, 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 ever heard anybody ever ask the question, why do good things happen, Robina? Are you with me? We only ever ask, why do bad things happen? I've never had a person say, you mean that beautiful child with the beautiful parents and lovely siblings and good food and good health, treated nicely, people adore them, you mean they deserve it? I've never heard that question yet. It's very fascinating, isn't it? We take the good for granted, you know. This is kind of fascinating. We ought to look at that psychologically, and psychologically that comes down to attachment and aversion, the two delusions that run our life, according to Buddha's model of the mind. Because we can't stand the thought of suffering, then the first thing we say is, how dare that happen? I don't deserve it, we say. What we're really saying is, I can't stand it. That's perfectly reasonable, but say the right thing. But we deduce we don't deserve it. And when the good happens, we never even ask why. We just take it for granted. We don't say, wow, isn't this fantastic? Just give me more, please. I don't care, you know, because we assume we deserve it. Buddha says it's a completely irrational assumption. It's like saying, how dare there be weeds in my garden? Who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. I deserve flowers. It just really, it makes you realize, makes you think that it's your garden, but you didn't do it. That's how we think about our life. It's insane for the Buddha. Your life is your garden, he says. Every bit that's in it, you did, babe. You better start owning it. It's kind of completely irrational to walk into a brand new house, which you just bought, and say, there's my garden, and then curse and swear, you know, about the garden. If it's in your life, if a person punches you in the nose, it's your punch coming back. If they kiss you, it's your kiss coming back. Every millisecond of your day, karma is ripening. And every millisecond of the day, just like in your garden, it's a dynamic rule. Every millisecond of the day, you're sowing seeds. That's why last night, the fundamental talk, first entry-level junior school in Buddhism, do not do negative things. Not because he says so. Not because he'll punish you. Not because, oh, it's just wrong. Because why? Because that is what will ripen as your suffering. This is Buddha's view. He says it's a natural law. No one made it up. No one's running it. There is no punisher. There is no rewarder. That, he says, is a dualistic view that our neurotic minds have made up. I love Buddha's view. I can't tell you. So any questions? What was the first part of the question?
The bad.
Yeah, what about the bad?
How do you...
That's called purification.
Yes.
We call it that. It's just a term they use in Buddhism. Mm-hmm. It's doing the weeding, okay? So if every millisecond of the day, and they would say that, we are sowing seeds, and if right now that we're fairly, you know, we're not, you know, we're not running around raping and killing too many people in this room, I would figure. We're in this room because we want to try and understand the meaning of life, and we're looking at the Buddha's ideas, you know, to see, do you understand? So not bad, pretty good, be very happy with ourselves. But nevertheless, if we understand Buddha's view about attachment and aversion, we get upset easily, we get hurt easily, we badmouth people, right? We do negative things because they're habits, you know. We kill the roaches and kill the rats, and maybe we even kill the hubby, who knows? But, you know, so we're doing stuff that's, because this is just samsara. Buddha means being caught up in these neuroses. We're just in samsara. And it's all very habitual because we become fully programmed with all these seeds. And we're just on autopilot most of the life, which is why we have to have concentration, which is why we have to know the mind, which is why we have to focus and start to actually be in charge of this process. So the very first level of practice is stop sowing more negative seeds. Stop sowing more weeds, right? That's the first one. Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal. You with me? But then at the end of the day, we do what they call in Buddhism purification. And as Lama Zopa says, we're insane not to do it every day. That's like the weeding. So the first level of practice is back off and don't kill, don't lie, don't steal. Don't sow more negativity. But the one you've got to do is learn to do the weeding of the stuff you've already planted. We're lugging countless lives of the junk with us before it starts to ripen. That's purification.
So wait, step back. When you say that at the end of the day you do the purification.
This is the practice of weeding. And I'll go into it. This is the weeding process. The live your life, the very first level, junior school level, which is how we talked yesterday, if you weren't here, I'm not sure, it doesn't matter, is you given that we don't want suffering, this is the first level of practice. Given, and anybody with half a brain would agree they don't want suffering, right? The very first level of practice is, I'm sick of suffering. It's got to be about oneself. I'm sick of suffering. We all agree we're sick of suffering, however we define it. We want to really be clear, though, because Buddha's got various levels of understanding suffering. But even regular old in-your-face suffering, we know we don't want that. So we know that from our own present experience. So then Buddha says, okay, Robina, you don't want bad things to happen to you. Well, then stop sowing the seeds, because you've created them. You with me? So, okay, I'm going one step at a time. First level of practice has to be this one. Stop sowing more weeds. The end of the day, best to do it at the end of the day. You look back on the day, you sort of check out the day, and you do this process in general of purifying the seeds you've already planted, God knows how many lives ago up to the present, that would ripen as suffering if you let them flourish. So we want to get ahead of the game and not let them flourish. And that's called purification. And it consists of 4. And because karma's done by the mind, it's experienced by the mind, it is a psychological process. So purification is also a psychological process. So that means the first one, they call the 4 R's, a good way to remember. The first one is regret. You've got to acknowledge, okay, I badmouthed the dog at 4 o'clock and I kicked my hubby at 2 o'clock and you understand? Whatever you can remember that day, and then in general, you then regret. You acknowledge, I did do that dumb action, which if I leave that seed in my mind will ripen as my suffering. And you know what? I'm sick of suffering, you say to yourself. So it's like, the first level is you stop eating the food that'll give you a bellyache, and the second one is you've got to clean up your act by going on a fast and try and sort out the junk you've already got inside your belly so it doesn't ripen as more sickness. That's the attitude, you know. So the first step is to regret. You acknowledge and regret what you've done. So of course a Buddhist, given that they take the view that their lives go back and back and back and back and back, and the Buddha would say we've been animals countless lives, we've been humans, we've done every imaginable negative action as well as positive, then you say, and meanwhile, while I'm at it, I regret anything I've ever done to harm any sentient being in the past. Because you know why? I don't want the future suffering. Then you go to the second step, and we would form, well, whom can I turn to? Where's the doctor? And that's our relationship with the Buddha. So we'd talk about taking refuge, we'd visualize the Buddha, whatever. But the second part here is where you now have compassion for those you've harmed. The third one is you do some kind of practice, and we have a certain formal type of practice we do. And the fourth one is we make a decision not to do it again. Essentially these 4. Regret, reliance, the remedy and resolve. That's how we talk about it. But bring it right down to earth. It's a psychological process. You're changing, you're sort of learning to change the actual construction of your own mind. Do you understand?
I do, and that means when you do die, does that mean that you don't, these things you won't bring in with the strength of whatever?
Of course, because this is the process. As Lama Yeshe says, we create negativity with our mind. Our mind is the universe. The mind is the boss. The mind does karma. The mind creates karma. Do you understand? Yeah. So we create negativity with our mind, he says, and that leaves imprints in the mind. So we purify it by creating positivity with our mind, reversing the process. It's a practical thing.
So those terrible things you've done when you're at your last stage of dying and moving on, can those fall, would they be burned less? Okay, I know, but it's, but if you hear what I'm saying, it's a logical answer. If you're playing the piano and you first acknowledge you just played the wrong note, right? What would you do? Well, then I would look at what the right note is.
So first you'd acknowledge you played the wrong note. You wouldn't say, I did not play the wrong note.
No, you acknowledge.
You'd acknowledge, you'd regret, oh, what a fool, I played the wrong note. So then immediately you'll counteract it with playing the right note. So wouldn't you, every time you play the right note, are you not weakening the tendency to play the... Well, the same here. It's a logical process. If every day you regret killing, lying, stealing, every day you regret your stupid depression and rubbish that breaks your heart, every day you do the opposite. You're growing that part and weakening the other. It's a natural, logical process. It's not kind of like concrete, you know? It's logical. Do you understand?
Yes.
It's like positive thinking.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Someone else?
Hi, I have a question. You gave the example that of bad karma, like I've killed in a past life, then I will be killed, right? And sort of more or
less. There's a type
less.
called the experience, similar
The
to the cause.
experience,
Yes, that's
exactly.
Right, that's right.
So how does that relate to good karma?
Same.
And also karma neutral, like, isn't...
Okay.
So for me, I get confused because I think that the goal is to create no karma. Like, in order, like,
I understand. There's different ways in the Buddhist teachings of interpreting this. So in one tradition, they talk about all karma being polluted. You've got to stop all karma. Another interpretation is that, another way of saying it is this, okay. So there's a progression, put it this way. So first of all, first level is at least quit doing the bad things.
Right.
And at least then, before you even begin to try to do good things, which also sows karmic seeds, at least you refrain from doing the bad. Play safe. They say if you can't help others, at least don't harm them. So you play safe the first level, and you back off, and by protecting yourself from doing more negative. You don't do the negative. Then as you get better and better, and you work on your mind, you learn to meditate, you know your mind well, you change your mind, then you can be really proactive in growing all the flowers, being virtuous, being loving to others, and you create virtuous karmic seeds. But as long as you're still in samsara, as they say, as long as you haven't realized emptiness, as long as you still believe in the deep instinctive sense of an inherent I, you're going to continue to create some kind of karma. But eventually when you've realized emptiness and perfected that, you could say you quit all kinds of negative or positive karma that would bring you future rebirths. You quit the need to get reborn. You've cut the motor of rebirth, which is the main result of good or bad karma. So that's true. But because then you've added bodhicitta to the mix and you're on the compassion wing and you want to benefit others, even though you've quit needing to be reborn, you choose to be reborn out to help others. So yes, in that sense you do. When you finally realize emptiness and perfected it, you don't need to be reborn. Therefore, you don't need to experience karma anymore. It's true, definitely. But because you want to benefit others, you come back again out of choice. And you could argue then that it could only create virtuous karma then. It's still karma in the technical sense of being cause and effect. Because what a Buddha is a being who's spontaneously wise and blissful and clear. So every millisecond of whatever the mind does keeps putting more of that petrol in the tank so it can never end. But the usual way of talking about karma is contaminated karma of an ordinary deluded sentient being, even if it's good karma. So you are right in a sense. Do you understand my point?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Where are we
Yes.
going?
This gentleman
Okay,
here.
we've got lots of-
Right here.
Hi, did Buddha ever have a consequence of interacting with someone where it became a physical circumstance, like someone attacking him?
Oh, he had lots of
physically?
experiences like this. Yes, there were
He
stories
did.
out there.
He did. How was his response to that?
Well, you read about all this. I mean, I think a lot of the teachings in those sutras, about how people tried to kill him and poison him and things. I know there was one experience he taught. There was a teaching about there's this marvelous place in India. Every year I lead a pilgrimage to all the holy places where Lord Buddha put his feet in India, which is I love doing it. Every year we do it. It raises money for our Liberation Prison Project. And there's one of those places we go to, way up in the north, out of the middle of nowhere, where many tourists don't go. It's called Shravasti, where Buddha spent all his rains, at least 25 to 30 years of his rains retreats with all his disciples, and they'd all go there and they'd meditate for all the rainy season. And so that place apparently is famous, so he went there, and they call it displaying all the miracles. He normally was very humble and unassuming and ordinary, but one time people accused him of different things, and so he responded by showing miraculous powers and things. Another time, different things. But the logic would be if he is a Buddha, he's gone beyond delusions altogether, gone beyond ego, so it would never have affected him. And usually, if you are at that level, the main way you'd respond would be for the benefit of the other person, to help them, Am I answering your question, do you think?
Yeah, I'm also wondering, like, with nonviolence as a practice, as a spiritual practice, how does that occur when someone is acting out on you
Harming
personally?
you mean?
Huh?
Harming us, if people harm us.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a tricky one, The in the Buddha's teachings are presented, especially in the Tibetan packaging of these teachings, they're presented in a very orderly way, orderly according to one's capacity. So that's why the very first level of practice is to mainly protect ourselves
from bad-mouthing, killing, lying, stealing, harming, punching, eating too much cake. You learn to use discipline and control of your own behavior because we're driven by attachment and anger right now. And so any action we do of harming others would just create more suffering for ourselves. So the first level of practice is really where we learn to discipline ourselves. And the response at that level, we try not to respond. But at a more advanced level, and that's not that easy because people do harm us in a terrible way. People do terrible things to us, we can see. So the classic approach for a Buddhist would be, that you at least have the explanation, and you'd have the explanation for why it's happening to you because you take on board the view of karma. If you're a Buddhist, so I use an example. Okay, I'll give you a good example, but this is really hard, In 2003, Richard Gere invited the Dalai Lama here, and he also invited 20 former prisoners. And because I was working at that time with people in prison, I ran this non-profit, he invited me and several other people. And we had this wonderful conference all day, and they met His Holiness. There were 20 ex-prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison, like a cross-section of Americans, black, white, male, female, Puerto Rican, Mexican, whatever. And it was a very moving day, all talking, and they met His Holiness. It was a wonderful day, And Richard also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns who'd been tortured and sexually abused for several years in Tibetan prisons, right? Now, there they are, born and brought up as Buddhists, which means, especially being Tibetan, the view of karma is in the bones of their being. That's their default view of the universe. Just like our default view of the universe is, we didn't ask to get born, mummy made me, daddy made me, who knows what. You understand my point? So their minds are imbued with this view of karma, and probably they've also studied it in depth, not just know the words, And so there they were, imprisoned and tortured. Well, it's not cool. Not cool at all. But they have their explanation for why it happened. And and I'm going to finish the story in a second, but if we look into our minds, I think we're going to see that when bad things do happen to us, our response is very much determined by the philosophical view we have. So if you're really a devoted Christian or Muslim, you'd accept it's the will of God and you try to forgive them. If you're a materialist, well, there is no explanation, which is why we all go crazy in our culture. Because we don't know why bad things happen to us. Mummy, we did not do anything to deserve this person stealing from us, lying to us, accusing us. And this is really a powerful point, in my opinion. In our materialist world, we don't have explanations for why bad things happen to us. Do you agree? Do you agree with my point? So no wonder we all go crazy. No wonder it's so painful. No wonder we freak out and have mental breakdowns, We nearly go mad when this bad stuff happens. So the Buddhist approach, like these young women, they had an explanation, which of course is difficult, but they use that to help them bear the problem. So when they finally, at the end of their talk, they were in tears. They were sad. And they were describing the suffering they experienced at the hands of these torturers. But they weren't angry, which is also an interesting point. Because they have an explanation. Anger says, how dare that happen to me? They didn't have that view. They knew why it was happening because they have the view of karma. So at the very end, they were very quiet and humble. And then they said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we knew we must have harmed them in the past. Now that's very heavy. That's difficult for most of us. If we've been brought up with the view that we don't know why we're born, we don't know why that person raped us, we don't know why that person stole from us, which is our view in the world, no wonder we go crazy. It's natural we go crazy. It's very, very, very painful. Are we communicating?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not easy. Not easy at all. But one step at a time, And another very powerful experience, an example of this, I find very marvelous actually, because I worked, as I said, worked for years with people in prison. And this one woman I read about, I didn't know her. We're seeing these days more and more people are being found to be innocent, having been on death row for 20 years. So much they're finding now with DNA evidence, and there's people working full time on, there's a thing called the Innocent Project. It's just fantastic what people are doing, trying to help people get out of prison, it's just incredible. So there's one story, I remember reading this woman in Florida, this is like 30 years ago. I read her memoir, I didn't meet her. And she basically was hitching with her husband with their 3 kids, and they get picked up by 2 guys, and the guys get stopped by the police, and the 2 guys kill the police, and then blame these people. So there's this man and this woman, you can't conceive of the nightmare, on death row, completely innocent. The husband even gets executed. Can you imagine the nightmare? Got executed, She was there for 17 years, she finally got out. But she's in this process of this nightmare, dealing with it, this amazing human being. I don't think she was a Buddhist, I think she did yoga and things, but this incredible human being, obviously. She said, she lost her kids and everything. She said, finally, I realized I couldn't change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. I mean, I think it's so moving to hear it. We can only imagine the nightmare to get to that, you know, to get to that. And in fact, many people do not get to that point and go completely out of their brains. One of the commonest things in prison is the intensity of the suffering, you know. At the same time, I read about some other guy, also innocent, but he went completely out of his mind. Every moment he had a voice, he'd be screaming, I did not rape and kill that woman. This is what's so profound. And this is the essence of Buddha's practice. This is the very essence, actually, of Buddha's explanation, of Buddha's view, approach to life. We can see bad things happen. He gives his explanation of why. But we can see, too, that we just sometimes cannot change it. So it's like, but and this woman got the point. But he says, but you know what, Robina? If you can change it, please do so. But if you can't, he's showing us the methods that we can change our mind. And all he's saying is, by changing our mind, that's how we can become peaceful. That's how we can be happy. That's how we can stop the insanity, you know. And his view of karma simply reinforces and underpins its possibility. Do you understand? It's not easy. It's the hardest. And this is the commonest thing. Look at the world. Look at the suffering. Look at what we call innocent people. In this conventional sense, yes, we're innocent. We didn't do anything to that person in this life. But look at what happens. And look at, in our culture, the insanity that comes from this, the nightmare, the despair, the grief, the loss, the suicide. Because we can't explain why it happens and we don't know how to get past it, you know. It's like a nightmare. Isn't it? This is the Buddhist approach. Not easy. But this woman, amazing. But they couldn't take my mind from me. I mean, it's so courageous to do that. So courageous, you know. Isn't it? And so she became this happy human being. I remember I read the New York Times. I read all these newspapers, actually. And I love the weddings page. I tell you, one of my favorite sections of the New York Times is it's a whole weekend section now on the iPad. It used to be Sundays. And I love it. It's all about human beings and their divorces and their weddings and these pictures and everyone blissful. I mean, I love it. Anyway, one beautiful story, a couple of years ago, I suddenly read about her. She's old now and kind of fat and middle-aged, you know, got out of prison. Fat and middle-aged. I'm fat and middle-aged. I'm fat and old. Sorry, I'm old. I forgot. Old is now, you know. So anyway, I loved it. She went to Ireland and was involved in some conference. And she met some ex-IRA guy who'd spent 30 years in prison. And they fell in love and now they're married in Ireland. I was very happy for her. I thought, well done. I'm very happy for her. It was wonderful. Nice ending. It's a nightmare. What else, people? Hang on, darling.
Hi. I'm wondering, since you read the New York Times, there is, as you know, the only, as far as I can see in this country right now, civil rights movement is Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
And it's probably the tip of the iceberg when you look at decades, probably, of black people who've been murdered by the police.
Uh-huh.
And
well, centuries, really. I mean, since
for sure,
but in modern times,
times,
quite heavy, yeah. Go on.
Michael Brown was murdered by the police
in
suburban St. Louis.
I understand that.
And what I don't understand is, one, where do social movements come into the question of karma?
I understand.
And there were huge demonstrations and riots down there.
Of course. So basically,
and
how
there
do
were
you
Buddhist
connect this
monks.
with,
There were Buddhist monks who came.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, so
well, of course. Have you noticed the Tibetans have been the main demonstrators in Tibet are the monks and nuns?
So my question is,
well, tell me how it contradicts.
As I understand what you're saying,
yeah, good.
Michael
so
Brown.
No, stop. Using your understanding, which you've got, you know, I know you've been around for years, using your understanding of the Buddhist explanation of reality and your understanding of the Buddhist view of compassion, try and interpret why a person would demonstrate. A Buddhist monk. Tell me why. Explain it using Buddha's view, which is your question to me, but I'm putting it back to you.
I don't really, to be honest, I don't really know.
You can't work it out.
I would think that they would have compassion.
What's a demonstration?
It's a demonstration against this injustice.
Right, so do you accept this injustice? Do you accept this injustice? Do you accept that?
No,
do you accept,
no, you're demonstrating because
excuse me, do you
who,
accept that in the world bad things happen to people? Do you accept that?
Yes, of course.
Well, okay, then Tibetans are getting slaughtered by the Chinese. Black people are getting slaughtered by cops. Women are getting raped by men. Do we accept there is called suffering on this earth?
Yeah.
Do you accept that?
So
well then, why does that mean you can't go and demonstrate? Just because you know that.
Why? Where's social movement?
Stop.
Where's the social justice movement?
I'm telling you. I'm trying to get you to think. I'm not going to give you a simple answer in a spoon. I'm trying to help you, with me, think it through logically. How, of course, you would go out there and help others and demonstrate. That's what social movement is. You go out there and help people. So why wouldn't you? You know, people demonstrate against the Chinese, against the communists against the Tibetans.
You want my answer?
Pardon?
Do you want my answer as far as what I understand what you're saying? My answer would be, since you're asking me, would be that, as I understand, and I might be not understanding, that Michael Brown, karma ripened, and he got murdered because...
Of course.
So all of these people are being murdered because of their karma, so why would there be a social justice movement?
But no one's arguing with that.
So...
Okay, just because you can explain the reason why there are weeds in your garden, why does that mean you should not pull the weeds out? Why does it not mean you should not find antidotes to the weeds? What says to you that because the Tibetans know very well they created the cause to be slaughtered by the Chinese communists, that doesn't, they know the reason why. They know the reason why, but that doesn't mean that what the Chinese doing is morally right. It's morally wrong that a policeman would kill a person because they're black. It's morally wrong that a communist Chinese would slaughter a Tibetan person because they're Tibetan Buddhist. So you demonstrate because you see injustice, but you happen to know the reason why it's there. You see, the view that you've got, which is the Western view, is they're all these innocent victims. And if they weren't innocent, well, they deserve what they get, so rape them again. No, that's wrong view. There is suffering. Buddha happens to have an explanation for why there's suffering. So that doesn't mean you can't get out there and demonstrate and get the Chinese to stop harming the Tibetans. Fantastic for everybody. Win-win. Can you think it through? But all the Tibetans go out there and demonstrate, don't they? But they know why the Chinese are harming them. They don't go, you see, we have the view, how dare this happen? We're an innocent victim. That's what is underpinning why we go demonstrate. But you know, do you see my point now? Can you see what I'm saying, the thinking? No, you can't. So
I'm still thinking that from what I'm understanding is that they got what they...
That means you're not hearing what I'm saying. So let me go slowly, and we'll think it through together. I'm not asking you to agree with me, but I'm trying to be using logic, taking these views. So here we have a person, a Tibetan person, born as a Tibetan nun in this life, like these young women I just discussed, right? And she's being tortured and abused by a person called a Chinese person. They're the conventional truths of today. So on a conventional level of morality, can we see from Buddha's teachings that killing is not cool, raping is not cool, that it harms sentient beings? Do you accept that?
Yeah.
You do, okay. And then we can see a situation in which that is happening, yeah? So it's not cool, is it? And it's also because it's the whole nation of Tibet suffering, then it's morally wrong because Tibet on a conventional level doesn't belong to the Chinese. The Tibetans would suggest that. On a conventional level of established geography and politics, Tibet is its own country and the Chinese communists shouldn't be there. Can you accept that as a statement? First of all, you have to establish what the statement is first. Can we accept that? Mm-hmm. So now what Buddhism does is explain why that is happening. The Chinese must have been abused by the Tibetans in the past. The Tibetans must have abused the Chinese. So they're each now responding to their past karma that they both created. That simply is an explanation for why it's happening. But you don't, then you've got another analogy. You've got a garden with weeds in it. Weeds is a synonym for suffering. You know why the weeds are there, because you put them there. Does that mean you shouldn't try to pull them out? Does that mean you shouldn't try to change your garden, which is what you're suggesting? That's all the Tibetans are trying to do. They're trying to point out to the world by going demonstrating, not with anger. They know why it's happening, but they want to try and help them. That's why the Dalai Lama's never stopped trying for 60 years. to help the situation change. But you see, our problem is we have an absolute default assumption that innocent people get harmed. And that's why we should demonstrate. But if we discovered that all, those black people actually were evil to the police, well, then we'd go, oh, they deserve it. Why demonstrate? So it's that assumption that's the mistake. The assumption that there's no cause for why innocent black people get hurt. All Buddha's saying is there is a cause, but that doesn't mean you sit back there and just take it. You can still change things. Are we communicating a bit better now? Do you think? What do you think? It's a really excellent point you're making. It's a really profound point, because that's the typical view in the West of karma. Because when we hear about karma, it sounds like, they deserve it. You understand? Mm-hmm. Whereas the Buddhist view of karma is we're all in this boat together, all harming and being harmed, life after life after life. And we should have compassion for every single sentient being, especially the harmers, because they're going to be the victims of next life. It's the basis of compassion. And it counteracts our view of an assumption of innocent victims and evil perpetrators. So as soon as we hear about karma, it confuses us. Well, they deserve it is the first thing we think. And if they deserve it, why demonstrate? Do you see my point? Mm-hmm. It's quite nuanced. Because really you're doing it with compassion. You're doing it for the sake of the Chinese, to stop them from creating negative karma. You could even say, every time now people come out with their video camera and say some copper, I mean, not all the cops are bad, we all know that, but let's say one person now with their video cameras and they're now being sacked because of it, whereas before they did it with impunity. Now they're being caught on video cameras. You can actually say with a really compassionate heart, it's good for them because you help them stop doing negative actions. That's the really profound view to have. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Are we communicating?
Yes.
Any more questions?
But isn't there also the other step that if they wouldn't have been killed, they would have had a chance to purify whatever...
Who? Which one's not killed?
Let's say
a person killed by a policeman. Yeah, what are you saying?
That a child who doesn't get killed has the chance to live and do something against their negative karma. They don't need to be killed for that. They could purify.
Yeah, they could, but the only reason that... What do you mean by they don't need to be killed?
No, I mean, you kind of said they got killed because of their...
Yeah, so if the seed is there, it will ripen.
But it could ripen, I mean, they could do something if they become...
If they purified, no, this is the point about purification practice. If we do our purification every day and we pull out those seeds, some karma of 22 years later when you're going to get killed, you'll purify it and you won't get killed. You're absolutely right. But you've got to do the work first. But you've got to do the work first. That's the internal view. Yes, get ahead of the game and pull out the seeds before they ripen. Absolutely. That's why purification practice is so powerful. Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. Okay, a few more here first. Hang on, darling. A few more here. Go on. Yes, go.
Well, first of all, thank you for everything that you just said. I think that was very beautiful.
Okay, good.
I have a question, and this is a different example, but so karma is created by the mind.
Yes.
I understand that.
Okay.
When, for example, a boss that we don't like because he treated us bad, get fired, and we rejoice.
Who gets fired? The boss.
The boss.
Yeah. And you rejoice, yeah.
Rejoice a little
Yes.
bit, but at the very same time, I feel that I should not feel that way.
That's right.
Because now he.
That's right.
So I'm creating bad
Yes,
karma.
you are. Every time you create, put it this way, it's really simple. It's really fundamentally simple. Every negative thought, and a negative thought is attachment, anger, jealousy, rejoicing in someone's suffering, especially, that's really heavy. It's a negative thought. It can only ripen as our suffering. There's no other choice for it. It's like a natural law, So that's, even sometimes they would say that if you rejoice in, like, I remember Timothy McVeigh, that white supremacist, and he didn't appeal his death sentence, so of course he got killed in a month, I mean, they're only on death row for 30 years because they're all appealing, costing hundreds of billions of dollars, to taxpayers, which is why death row is so stupid, you know. So anyway, he didn't appeal, so he got killed in a month. Well, people, I remember somewhere at midnight, the moment he was going to get executed, they all had a party celebrating his death. Well, even the Buddhists would say that's even heavier than doing the killing, even heavier. Equally, to rejoice in something good is even more powerful than sometimes than someone else who does the good. So it's so important what we do with our minds, not to rejoice. And again, don't be moralistic about it. It's not for his sake. He doesn't even know. It's for your own sake. And this is the part that's so hard with karma, why I stressed it so much last night. We're so used to thinking of karma as morality, as punishment. This is our default mode of morality. So, you know, we sort of think we're allowed, if someone's mean, we're allowed to be angry. You understand? But Buddha says, whatever you do in your mind, darling, you program your mind with that. And then when we have the view of karma, it really makes you accountable because you know it's for your sake.
I totally agree with that. So what can I do to not even have or train my mind?
Well, darling, you can't be perfect yet. You notice, that's why you've got to have awareness. You notice it, and then you regret it, and you counteract it. It's very easy. You know, it's like if you're noticing you're going into the wrong lane in the road, you don't agonise, what should I do about it? Just get back in the right lane, please. Do you understand?
Yes.
Fix it then.
I'm doing that already.
Well, honey, then you're practicing. It's fantastic.
Okay.
So don't be nervous because these old habits are very hard. Mm-hmm. And that's a very big point. This is a massive point. Our mind goes very deep. You know, there's levels and levels of stuff that, you know, years it takes us to get unravel it all. So it's going to come up very instinctively. So there's a big difference in seeing negativity pop up, but you're conscious of it and then you change it, than having negativity pop up and then you increase it. Mm-hmm. That's a very big difference. So don't be scared of seeing it. But when you're aware, and that's what we have to do more and more, you're able to grab your thoughts and fix them, you know. And be glad you see it. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Following it through, that's the part that's heavy. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
If there is a relationship with the mind...
Start again, darling. Have the mic.
Huh?
Just use the microphone. Yes.
Yes. If there is a relationship with the mind,
What do you mean a relationship? What do you mean?
I mean, we are mind...
You are the mind. Your mind does the job. Yeah, go.
Yeah.
Go.
Is the ego a projection of our mind?
I see,
Or is
okay.
our mind a projection of our own
I
ego?
sit down, darling. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Okay. Well, this gets us to the fundamental problem, the fundamental neurosis, the fundamental mistake, the fundamental delusion, the fundamental negative state of mind in the mind is one that's referred to as ego grasping. It's very tasty. And that is the delusion or the neurotic state of mind deeply ingrained, so instinctive that we don't even have a name for it in our materialist models of the mind, that the Buddha would say is the source of all our problems. So it's the very deep instinctive assumption of a concrete, real, solid me. And that underpins everything we do. It's the deepest mistake. And it's finally the one that we have to eradicate from the mind. So ego is this loose word we all know. It comes from the Greek I. It's a word that, you know, is coined by Freud, I suppose. I don't know. It's a very loosely used word to refer to this neurotic feeling we have of an I that's separate and lonely and bereft and gets angry and gets upset and wants this and doesn't want that and blames and is guilty. All of those are like the voices of the ego. And that's what Buddha means by being in samsara. And being caught up in all this rubbish is why we create negative karma and do bad things and why we suffer. So one aspect of practice is refrain from doing bad things, control your body and speech, and then you're able to start doing the real job, as Lama Yeshe says, of being your own therapist, going deeply into your mind and seeing all these delusions and understanding yourself well, and eventually when they're most advanced, with deep concentration, able to uproot this wrong sense of self, which is the cause of all the problems.
Thank you.
Is that clear? Did you understand? Okay. Yeah? Okay. So ego, is made up by the mind, basically. Well, Buddha says everything's made up by the mind. Everything's made by the mind. The mind is the creator of the universe, actually. That's what he says. Huh? Give the microphone. Absolutely. We are the architect of our own reality. After life, after life, after life. Buddha says this. Absolute certainty. And the creator of all happiness and all suffering. Yes, that's right. That's what he says. Yeah. That's his trip. Yes.
So, in interaction with two people, let's say, family member, child.
Yes.
So child does something that annoys the parent.
Annoys the parent or is negative from the child's side? Which one?
Well, that's kind of my question.
Okay.
So as a parent, I see the child do something and it's like, oh.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
Not good. You know, that's not going to work out well.
Uh-huh.
So my experience is a ripening of my karma, something I've done in the past, or the child's having a different experience, but it's one event.
Yes.
But we're having two experiences.
No, it's one. Yes, true.
What's the connection?
I
That's
understand.
my question.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand. Well, first of all, for that child to even get born to you to be their father is pretty intense karmic connection already. And there they are with their particular set of delusions or their particular set of states of mind interpreting you in a certain way. And so in that you see, that's the point. In that case, it might just be they didn't intentionally do anything, but because you get irritated easily, you experience it as them doing something to you, and that's a very common experience we all have. So you could argue the cause of that will be something you've done in the past to project onto someone else a mistake that they didn't even do, because that's been done to you in the past. We all know that happens. People think you're being mean, but you weren't being mean. People think you lied, but you weren't lying. So that's the type. Your experience is the type of karma called experience similar to the cause, that just their action upset you from something you must have done when you were innocent, when they were in. You understand? So that's your side, and indeed, yes, they're not experiencing it at all. They're just being who they are, and didn't intentionally do anything. And didn't even do anything wrong, even unintentionally. So it's your particular karma of something you did in the past that you're experiencing now. You'd say it that way, I'd say. Does that make sense?
Any understanding at all of what they're experiencing or not?
It doesn't matter. Okay. Experience similar to the cause is one track of karma that each of us has that is the experience we have at the hands of others. So a typical example, like I just said, would be if you speak the truth but someone thinks you're lying. You're not, but that's because you've got the particular karma of being seen as a liar. On the other hand, I remember as a child, I purposely lied at school to give an answer because I was being a smarty pants, and everybody believed me. So that's the other way around. That was because of my speaking the truth in the past that people believed my words. I remember even as a child thinking I better be careful with my words if people are going to believe me even when I lie, Do you understand? I remember that. I remember it. So it's like that. So however we're seen by others, but in this case, they weren't doing anything to you. You were doing the projecting. You were doing the projecting. They weren't, you understand. You were doing the projecting, yeah. So in other words, a child, for example, who gets born, there's always two people, it's like when two people have to play tennis, What do they say? Takes two to tango. Well, so there's a child who goes into someone's womb who, due to their virtuous karma, one track of virtuous karma of the fully ripened result, they got a human birth. But they had another track of karma of killing in the past, so they died young, they got aborted. And not just they died young, but they got killed. So the one track of karma is the type of life, next one is your tendencies, next one is your experiences, and next one is your environmental. And then we've all got those, and then everybody else out there is playing out their stuff in relation to us, Yeah. Someone else? Yes.
So you were saying, as far as tendencies go, let's say I have a tendency to get frustrated, like we were just saying.
Which is a polite word for anger, by the way.
Okay, great. So I have a tendency to get angry.
Annoyed, upset, irritated, frustrated, polite words for anger.
So as far as awareness goes, at acknowledging this tendency, is it, in your opinion, is it more useful to just find it in that moment, have the regret, turn it around, or is it important to find some kind of where did this come from?
No, where they come from is what we think in the West.
Yeah.
You're looking for some needle in a haystack. It's a tendency. If you see it as a tendency, it's unbelievably embarrassingly simple. It's like, it's every time you play the wrong note on the piano, you go to you go to the psychologist. Why did I play the wrong note? What was the reason I played the wrong note? You understand that that's how we are. We're so kind of drama queens. It doesn't mean there aren't some things that happened that didn't help you trigger these habits, but the really most marvelous direct approach is own that tendency. Now, you know, the fact is a person might have been really ugly to you. You know, the other person might be really horrible. That's not being argued with here. Do you understand my point?
Yeah.
But that's not your business in this case. If they are a maniac, get the hell out of their way. Stop having a relationship with them, you know, and look at your tendency to be a victim. But it is helpful to see this person, but the really powerful job is to see whatever arises, and so that's my tendency. It's just a habit. And then to act on that one. You know, it's so direct, it's like amazing. Do you understand?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't ask the person to stop punching you. Please ask them. They might even agree. Do you see my point?
Yes, I do.
But when we put all the blame onto the outside and then onto some past event, we spend our lives like in a nightmare. Do you understand?
Yeah.
This is miraculous if we can be brave enough. Quick fix, you know?
So then this in some way sort of eradicates the idea of Western therapy as far as going back to looking at childhood. Okay.
That's my point. I'm not saying it's not good. Please, I beg you, don't misunderstand me. I've got a friend who is a Buddhist and who's an amazing therapist, one of the best I've ever met. And she does a really good job, and these people need her badly. But if a person is capable of doing this, you don't need the therapist. And I'm not being sarcastic or rude or clever or anything. We've got to know ourselves. We all need help, you know? So to have one friend, even whether you call them a therapist or not, to talk to, and if they're being a good therapist, their job is to be a sounding board for you, to know your mind. So if we can do that without a therapist, great, but don't be stubborn. Oh, I shouldn't have a therapist. Go for it. Whatever works to help us know our own mind is the bottom line. Do you understand?
Yes.
But to look back into what your mummy did and daddy did, it's like, I think you won't come to the solution doing that. It's nice to remember what they did. It can be helpful to us. But when you're convinced that's the cause, you'll end up being in therapy until the day you die. Do you understand?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
How do you create the causes to have a direct perception of emptiness?
Well, you've got to start doing junior school, back off, live in vows, stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing, control your behaviour, give up sex, drugs and rock and roll, go to the mountains, get single point of concentration, become your own therapist, get rid of the ego and attachment and anger and jealousy and pride, and then you'll be able to realise emptiness quite quickly. That's the direct method.
So just pull the weeds. So just pull the weeds, basically.
Yeah, if you want to go slowly and want boyfriends and sleep and food and sex and drugs in between time, it'll just take you longer. That's perfectly fine. We do what we do, you know. Sweetheart, direct let's talk about that then. 8:45. Time to go home soon. Okay, the point of all of Buddha's teachings, all the way the progress of karma, the mind, all of this is leading us to get to the deeper level of our mind so we can unpack and unravel the misconceptions and distinguish them from the virtues, so we can get to see how they are liars. This is the key thing we have to understand about Buddha's view of the mind, that these so-called negative states of mind, anger, jealousy, depression, pride, arrogance, low self-esteem, are rooted in the root delusion, as they call it, like I mentioned, which is known colloquially as ego grasping. The crucial thing to understand the Buddhist model of the mind, the psychological model, is the distinction between these negative and positive and neutral states. It's like a really simple but profound, in terms of the depths to which you can understand it, model of the mind. So you've got states of mind that are, they call negative, which means they're also known as disturbing emotions. They're also known as a term in Tibetan, which is for me, it's very medieval. We just don't use it in our daily life. Mental afflictions. Well, it's a bit shocking, but if you look at a dictionary, affliction, illness is a good word. Mental illness. You hear that word, that's a bit shocking to us. So anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem, or all mental illnesses. And I mean this term literally. This is what Buddha's saying. In other words, they're states of mind, they're real states of mind. They tend to have a very powerful emotional component for us. When we think of these things, we think of emotions, don't we? But the more we become our own therapist, using controlling our body and speech first, living in vows, and then becoming our own therapists by using single point of concentration, so we get very focused. And we literally can go ever more subtle into our minds and unpack and unravel the highly elaborate, distorted, delusional embellishments, embellishing stories that underpin what we call anger and emotions, you know? So we call them emotions because we don't notice them until they hit the body. I mean, if you're a depressed type person, you won't know you're depressed until you can't get out of bed one morning. In other words, we have to wait that long until you're inert that you've noticed you've got a problem. With anger, it's easier because when the words vomit out the mouth, you go, oh gosh, I must be angry. It doesn't take so long to notice. But the point is we don't notice until there's some physical indicator. And that's why we have to go to the bloody therapist. Because we've left it too long, you know. So the Buddha's deal is just very practical. Get into your mind so you can see this stuff coming. And the real point of this, and Buddhist psychology is so marvelous, is underpinning what we call these powerful emotions are these elaborate conceptual stories, distorted descriptions of the person, the self, the event. What do you think anger is? It exaggerates the ugliness of the thing or the person. What is depression? It exaggerates the ugliness of you. What is attachment? It exaggerates the deliciousness of the person, the event. They're all distorted. They're embellishments. In other words, they're not accurate assessments of reality. That's why they cause so much pain. When we can begin to see this, we really have insight into how our minds work. So all what it's saying is, they're distorted stories, they're exaggerated delusions, and they bring enormous pain. Check the last time you're depressed, anxious, we all know they're painful. Because they're not true, which sounds so peculiar to us. And they're rooted, there's like a hierarchy of them, they're rooted in this root delusion, as they call it, which is known simply as ripa, unawareness, or simply ignorance. But it's known colloquially, as I said, as ego grasping. And this is the most primordial lie, delusion, embellishment of all. But it's so instinctive. Like I said, we don't even have a name for it, equivalent for it in any of our Western psychology. In fact, the very concrete I this ego grasping posits is actually, as far as the West is concerned, does exist. So we reinforce this neurotic sense of I in the West. Whereas Buddha says it's the root delusion. The root lie, the root exaggeration, the root embellishment, the root misconception. But it's so subtle, it's extremely hard to even hear its story. And that's what we mean by realizing emptiness. Simply, we have to realize the lack, the absence of the I that delusion makes up. And this is the hardest job of all. So that's why I answered, live in vows, best to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll, get to the point where you have single point of concentration, don't need to sleep, don't waste your time, and be your own therapist, get through and get to the root of it and uproot it, and then come back and have fun, you know. And help others.
Thank you.
Then you can have sex, drugs and rock and roll falling out your ears. I'm sort of joking, but then you'll help others, basically. So the point is, okay, what happened? It's going the wrong way anyway. This way. Come on, you did the wrong thing. You're wrong. I'll send him to California. He's going off to Vajrapani Institute. When are you leaving?
I will start in February 1st. I'll be there at the end of December.
Oh, I won't see you.
I won't see you.
Never mind, when I come back. Okay, so I think I want to finish with emptiness, a bit more about emptiness. Shall we talk about emptiness a bit more? Yes. Okay. This is where we really get confused, you know, but it's not necessary to be confused. It's just we have to learn the terminology, that's all, you know. Basically what Buddha's saying about all these delusions, as Lama Zopa says, all these neuroses, all these embellishing states of mind that come along with this powerful emotional component, they, as Rinpoche says, what they do is they decorate on top of what does exist, layers upon layers of characteristics that just don't exist there. So attachment embellishes the deliciousness of Fred when you're in love with him. We all know that. He looks completely divine. But then after 3 months, and now you fight, and now you've got anger in your mind. Look how he looks now. Completely disgusting. We know this. We know it. We just don't join the dots. So, before attachment exaggerated his deliciousness, and of course because attachment has this added bonus, which is why it's so hard to give it up, of triggering very nice feelings in the body. But then eventually when he stops doing what your attachment wants, he fits in the sheets and puts the toilet lid, doesn't put it down, and comes home late and looks at other girls, slowly your attachment gets fed up because it's not getting what it wants, and it turns into anger. First of all, just frustration, annoyance, irritated, upset, slowly grows until eventually you can't stand the sight of him. And now he looks revolting. We know this. So it's obvious from this that the Fred that you thought was there when he was divine wasn't there, and now the Fred that you think is there when you think is disgusting, they're both distortions, they're both embellishments, they're both exaggerations, and this is what we spend our lives doing, Buddha says. Running around all attachment, wanting to get delicious things because we're convinced when I get them I'll get happy. But they're exaggerating everything. And then because it's not a true story, the bubble will burst one day, and then, you'll go crashing down to despair where you think everything's revolting now. We go up and down like yo-yos. This is called samsara. We call it bipolar. We'll join the club. We're all bipolar. I'm really not joking, It's attachment and aversion. We're running like mad people between these. So anyway, they're rooted in the deepest misconception of this concrete, real, definite, inherent self that we are convinced is attached, wants happiness, doesn't want this, is this, and it's like the one that runs the show in the head, right? Well, Buddha says even that is an exaggeration. There is an I, there is a Fred, there is a cake, there is a pillar, there is a door, there is a relative reality. But as Lama Zopa says, with delusions, we exaggerate that relative reality and decorate decorate things on top that just don't exist there. But he says when we realize the emptiness, the lack of that inherent thing we just projected, it is if there's no pillar, no self, no Fred, no this and no that. But there is, he says. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if there isn't. So it's a really subtle and fine point we have to learn to get. So basically Buddha's saying delusions distort reality. And Buddha's saying we've got to be in sync with reality for a very simple reason, because that's how things exist. And right now we're living in la-la land, and that's why we suffer. So if we suffer because we exaggerate reality, then seeing reality, which is a natural law, is the cause of happiness. It's a very interesting point for the Buddha. Get rid of delusions is the source of getting happy, because delusions cause suffering. So we're running after things that don't exist, he says. But don't chuck the baby out with the bathwater, because there is a relative reality, but it's very subtle. So the really most marvellous way to present all this is the way that Tsongkhapa, our 14th century lineage Lama, runs with, which of course is Buddha's main teaching, which is dependent arising and emptiness. Dependent arising is relative reality, conventional reality. So in terms of the self, let's say, there is a self, okay? The word self or I or person, these are synonymous. We are all an example of a self. This is an example of a chair. That's a thingamy. That's a cup. That's a table. So you first establish something conventionally. You name it. And you define it. This is a crucial point, finally, when it comes to understanding emptiness. We have to understand that what a thing is relatively. So what's a cup, mummy? Well, darling, it's that flat-bottom container. That's the first part of the definition. It's conventional reality. A clay container. The second part of the definition is crucial. It tells you what it does. It holds your tea. Now you know the definition of a cup, conventionally. But, that's not enough. You've got to prove it's true. And this is where Buddha says it's not coming from on high, because the mind creates everything. So then you say, well, let me prove that it holds my tea. Don't just believe it holds my tea. That's just a belief. I get my tea and I pour, and we will see that it in fact fulfills its definition. It fits. It holds my tea. So we can sign off now, as long as there's no other valid cognition that contradicts it. Now we can say there is a cup conventionally. But now we have to discuss how it really exists, because even that, we know the words, but we don't get it right. It's appearing to us wrongly. So we have to look at how it does exist, Buddha says. So we first have to take that there is a cup conventionally. So there's different levels of which Buddha talks about emptiness, the absence of the fantasy. So let's revert to the object called self. This is an example. Each of us is an example of a person, an I, or a self. Conventionally speaking, we fit the definition of a self. So what Buddha is saying is, and this is a sort of the grosser level of selflessness. This is not the subtlest yet, but this is also very tasty. It leads us to the subtler one. What he's basically saying is, if this second level, this is a second level of dependent arising for our tradition. This is like the grosser level. Basically, we can say that self is the term we use to refer to these bits and pieces. Everything's got bits and pieces, hasn't it? Everything's made of parts, as they say. So cup is the name we give to these bits and pieces, those parts. Then the self, in each of our case, is the name we give to this bunch of parts. Everything's made of parts, isn't it? So Buddha's basically saying that we are convinced, this ego grasping is convinced that among all these parts, all the bits and pieces of your mind, all your thoughts, your anger bits, your jealousy bits, your love bits, your kind bits, the mind is made up of many parts, and all the bits of your body, the joints, the ligaments, the blood, the pee-pee, the caca, the breast, the knee. The body's made of billions of parts, and the mind is made of billions of parts. And the body and mind are the parts of a person. Okay, so what Buddha's saying, we are very convinced, utterly convinced, and our language reinforces this, that there is a part walking hand in hand with all the other parts called I. We talk like this. I am walking down the street. My knee hurts. So we posit there's an I that feels pain in the knee. There's a knee and an I. That's how we think, isn't it? I have anger. We posit there's an I and there's anger. I've got a chair. We posit there's an I that has a chair. Relatively, that's okay. An I does have a chair. Here's the I and there's the chair. So what he's saying is, this I that we think is there, and we don't think like this. We have to learn the words. That I that we think is there, we believe it's an independent I, an I that's independent of the parts. And he says that you have to analyze this, and you will find that that is an impossibility. Okay. My table has a cup. Can you see that? Would you agree, in conventional sense, the cup and the table are independent? One can exist without the other. That's what independent means here, in a simple sense. They're not dependent on each other, are they? Would you agree with that? You can remove the cup from the table, can't you? You can, can't you? So that's how we think. We think there's a bit in there that's independent, that's kind of like the boss piece, the bit that runs the show, like the landlord, but it's independent. We think that. And he says that's just plain silly. Because if there were an I that were independent of the other parts, you'd have to just strip away all the parts and you'd be left with the I. He says you won't find it because it's not there, because you don't need such a part. It's unnecessary, and there can't be one like that. If there were a piece that is independent of the other parts, like we talk, I have a knee. You can remove, okay, I have a knee, a nose and a hand, you can see that. And I have many other things too. So that means we think if you remove the knee, you remove the hand, you remove the foot, and you'll end up with the I that owns them. You can't, he says. It's an impossibility. You won't find such an I. You won't. You can't, and you don't need it. It's an embellishment. We've made it up. We have made it up. You can remove the table from the cup, no problems. Look right there. But you remove your knee, you remove your mind, you remove all the bits, you put all the bits of you piled out. It's a really good meditation to do. You consciously unpack yourself, all the bits of you. And Buddha says it's your body and your mind. You unpack all the bits of your mind, your love, your hate, your compassion, your this, your that, pile all up. You remove all the bits of your body, your blood, your pee-pee, your caca, your knee, your nose, your this, your joints, your blood, you name it. Eventually you'll exhaust all the bits and we are convinced you'll be left with a little kind of mini me in there who's been running the show all the time. He's now been found out. You can't, he says, you can't find it. You can't find it. The crucial piece is to understand what independent means in this sense. So, you know, it's like you can see the table has same here. The table has a cup, right? So remove them, nothing's changed. But you say my table has a leg, doesn't it? Remove the leg, it's quite different, isn't it? Where's the chair, where's the table, but this is not the leg? You remove the leg, there's no table. You can't find, otherwise you remove the leg, you remove the top, you remove the bottom, where's your table? You can't find a table that isn't simply what's made of the parts. It's very quick and easy. Where's the cup? Apart from the handle and the base, but we can still say my cup has a handle, but we get tricked by that. We say the same with I. Yes?
Can you make the distinction between the I that is very clear, it doesn't exist, and that I think you called it a stream of...
That's different. That's a consciousness, darling. That's nothing to do with it. Your mind is your mind is one part of what we call the conventional self. A self conventionally, remember I started off, you are, what's your name? Pamela. Pamela is the name we give to an example of a person. We're all different persons. So conventionally, person is the right label for you. Conventionally. So that consists of two parts mostly, body and mind. So they are the components of Pamela. Is not the self. Nothing to do with it. No, of course not. It's only one part of yourself. But it needs it for the recording.
Okay.
It's only one part. Many of the Buddhist schools, there are different Buddhist schools, and some of them posit that there has to be something. And it's usually a part of the mind. They say there has to be something we call Pamela, otherwise we can call Pamela anything. But this view we're discussing here, which gets to a subtle level in a minute, we've got no time, where we get to the subtlest level, that it's unnecessary. Mind is just one part of Pamela, so it can't be the self, because self consists of body and mind, conventionally. But this ultimate one is the absence of that I that we think is there. That's what emptiness refers to. Emptiness is when you see nakedly the absence of that I you thought was there. That's what emptiness refers to.
Oh, thank you for making that
You with me?
distinction
Yeah,
between
good.
the
Pamela.
mind.
That's a really important part. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
So what emptiness means is simply a word for the absence of something. So like, you know, if you're convinced there's $10,000 in your bank, utterly convinced because you saved it, you know it's there, and you go online to take it out, and you see a zero. Now believe me, you won't see a zero. You'll get a huge shock and you'll go, oh my God, there's no $10,000, won't you? So what you just saw, technically speaking, is the emptiness of $10,000. Can you hear that? The absence of something you thought was there. That's how they use the word emptiness. It's a shock to your system. So if I look in your bank and I'm not expecting $10,000, I'll just see what is there, which is called a zero. Are you seeing my point? So it's the absence of something. In other words, the absence, when you see the absence of something, it's a very powerful experience, isn't it? But it's the absence of something you thought was there. That's the key point. It's not just, you just chuck out all the dollars and you say, oh, there's no dollars. No, that's not the emptiness of dollars. The emptiness of $10,000 is the absence of what you thought should have been there, and you get the shock of your life when you realize it's not there. That's not the same as saying there's no dollars in your bank. It's a very big difference. Can you hear that point? So all Buddha's saying is the I that we think is there, this little inherent, and we haven't even talked the subtlest level yet, but this we totally believe, and he says since beginningless time we have believed it, and this belief in the inherent I is the cause of all suffering, all rebirth, all hell, all heaven, all negativity, all misery. It's one that runs the show. We have believed since beginningless time in the presence of a real, solid I that's independent of causes, conditions, and parts and everything else. And the subtlest one is even more subtle, which is meaning, we won't even go there. But we believe totally in that one. And that's our language expresses it. Everything expresses it. When you're attacked, when you're offended, this little eye rises like a sleeping lion and feels hurt and broken-hearted. All that pain, all that hurt, all that attachment, all that anger, all that jealousy, all those dramas come from believing in the presence of this little mini-me that just simply has never been there and could never been there. Part of the discussion and the logical arguments we have to use is to prove how if it did exist, how it would exist, and how what it would be if it did couldn't exist. So you've got to squeeze your head a bit with it, you know. So it's the belief in something that doesn't exist. So as Lama Zopa says, the first moment you have this direct realization, this direct insight into the absence of that fantasy I. From that second, you are now climbing out of samsara into nirvana. You cannot fall back. You can only go forward. And as he says, the first response for inferior practitioners is unbelievable fear. But the better response for the greatest yogis is joy. When you finally see the absence of the thing you thought was there that has never been there. I mean, it's a really fine point, you know, obviously. But we've got to get the words right. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more whenever we've got time. This is what cuts all the karma. From there on, you can't fall back. You've got more to purify, more work to do, but you can't fall back from that. And Buddha says since beginningless time, we've had the best and the worst of the realms of existence. The best, we've had high realizations, we've had single point of concentration countless times, we've been in samadhi, we've been in bliss, we've had powers, we've been clairvoyant, we've had the worst sufferings of the hells, but we've never realized emptiness. And until we realize emptiness, until then, we will continue to be caught up in the good and bad karma. When we've cut the root and perfected that, then you can say, in that sense, contaminated karma quits, you know. And then you mix this with compassion, the bodhisattva wing, and then you help others. All of Buddha's teachings are leading to this. Okay, time to go home. Let's think about it overnight. And we'll talk more. If you're coming back again, we'll talk more, certainly the weekend, I think. Okay, people, thank you so much. We delight in this couple of hours we've been together, all these thoughts we've had, all these insights, these ideas, these things to think about. Don't just believe anything and don't disbelieve. Use it to think, you know, think. Use our minds to think about things. And all of Buddha's teachings, as it said, if this is from Buddha's own experiences, then it has to be experienced and cognized by us too. It's not a belief system. And that's where we're heading with it all. To experience and verify it for ourselves, one step at a time. And to have the experiences that Buddha says we can have, which he says he had, which is the fruit of this thinking. You know? So may we do that, never stopping, developing our marvelous potential, so we can be a benefit to others. Kewadinyu dudag Lama Sangye Drub Gyurne Drowa Chikyang Malupa Dei Sala Kupasho Jang Chob Sem Chog Rinpoche Ma Kye Panam Ke Gyo Chig Kye Panyam Pa Me Payang Gong Ne Gong Du Vaba Sho. Thank you, everybody.